Sometimes wealth isn't worn on the outside, and true class has nothing to do with designer clothes. In a world where appearances often determine treatment, one hotel manager learned that the most dangerous assumption you can make is judging someone's worth by their wardrobe. This is the story of a woman who carried herself like royalty while dressed like a traveler. And the moment when her true identity shattered every preconception in a five-star hotel, what happened next would become a viral sensation that reminded everyone that respect should never depend on the price tag of someone's outfit. If stories like this restore your faith that dignity always prevails over prejudice, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button.
Madam, this hotel isn't for you,
The hotel manager said with a cold voice. The woman stood up, maintaining her dignity, but as she picked up her bag, her ID card fell to the floor. When the manager bent down and picked it up, seeing retired general written on the card, his breath was taken away. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please subscribe for more moments where dignity triumphs over discrimination and where true worth reveals itself in unexpected ways. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel in downtown Chicago stood as a monument to luxury and exclusivity, its facade gleaming against the afternoon sky like a palace from a bygone era. The building rose 37 stories into the Chicago skyline, each floor representing decades of prestige and uncompromising standards that had made it the preferred destination for world leaders, Hollywood celebrities, and business titans who demanded nothing less than perfection. Its marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers that had been commissioned from Austria in 1923, each one worth more than most people's annual salaries. The chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across Persian rugs that had been hand-woven by master craftsmen in Iran over a century ago, their value now approaching the cost of luxury homes. Every surface spoke of wealth and exclusivity, from the gold leaf that decorated the ornate ceiling moldings to the rare Italian marble that had been quarried specifically for this hotel's construction. On this particular Tuesday afternoon in October, the lobby buzzed with its usual atmosphere of refined activity. Well-dressed business people conducted high-stakes negotiations in leather chairs that cost more than luxury automobiles, their voices kept to the respectful murmur that characterized truly elite establishments. Elegantly attired women sipped Dom Perignon champagne that cost $300 per glass, their jewelry catching the light from the chandeliers as they discussed charity galas and exclusive social events. The staff moved with the practiced efficiency of dancers performing a well-rehearsed ballet, their uniforms pressed to perfection, their service polished through years of training in the art of anticipating the needs of the ultra-wealthy. Every employee understood that working at the Grand Metropolitan was not just a job, but a privilege that came with the responsibility of maintaining standards that had been established over nearly a century of operation. Hotel manager Richard Sterling surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of someone who had climbed from humble beginnings to a position of significant authority within one of America's most prestigious hospitality establishments. At 45, Richard had dedicated 23 years of his life to the hospitality industry, starting as a teenage bellhop at a modest hotel near O'Hare Airport, and eventually earning his current position through a combination of relentless ambition, careful political maneuvering, and an unwavering commitment to what he called maintaining the Grand Metropolitan standard. Richard's office overlooked the lobby from a mezzanine level, providing him with a perfect vantage point to observe every interaction, every guest, every potential situation that might require his personal intervention. He took particular pride in what he privately referred to as quality control, his ability to identify individuals who might not meet the hotel's unspoken but rigidly enforced standards for clientele. In Richard's carefully constructed worldview, The Grand Metropolitan's reputation depended not merely on providing excellent service, but on ensuring that the guest experience remained exclusive and refined. This meant maintaining an environment where wealthy patrons felt comfortable spending enormous sums of money without encountering what Richard considered disruptive elements. People whose appearance, behavior, or background might somehow diminish the carefully curated atmosphere of luxury and privilege. Richard had developed what he considered an expert eye for identifying people who belonged in the Grand Metropolitan and those who didn't. His assessment process was swift, and in his opinion, highly accurate. Designer clothing, expensive accessories, confident demeanor, and what he termed the right kind of bearing were all positive indicators. Conversely, budget clothing, practical accessories, overly deferential behavior, or uncertainty about hotel protocols were immediate red flags that triggered his intervention. That's when she walked in, and everything Richard thought he knew about judging people would be challenged in the most devastating way possible. General Victoria Hayes entered the Grand Metropolitan Hotel with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, though absolutely nothing about her appearance suggested the remarkable background that had made her one of the most respected military leaders of her generation. At 52, Victoria possessed a natural elegance that transcended clothing, an inner confidence that had been forged through decades of leadership in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Today, however, she was dressed for comfort and practicality rather than impression. She wore well-worn jeans that had seen countless travels across multiple continents, a simple cotton sweater in navy blue that showed its age through slightly faded areas around the elbows, and practical walking shoes that prioritized function over fashion. Her canvas travel bag, though sturdy and well-made, bore the signs of extensive use and looked decidedly out of place among the Louis Vuitton and Hermès luggage typically seen in the Grand Metropolitan's lobby. Victoria had just completed an emotionally exhausting cross-country drive from her retirement home in the mountains of Colorado to attend a military ceremony in Chicago. The 18-hour journey had been both a physical and emotional pilgrimage, giving her time to prepare mentally for what would be one of the most difficult events of her retirement, a memorial service honoring fallen soldiers who had died under her command during her final deployment. The drive had been deliberate rather than necessary. Victoria could easily have afforded first-class airfare, but she had needed the solitude and contemplation that only a long road trip could provide. The highways had given her space to remember each of the soldiers who would be honored, to prepare remarks that would comfort their families while acknowledging the magnitude of their sacrifice. The Grand Metropolitan had been recommended by Colonel retired Jennifer Walsh, a fellow veteran who had stayed there during a similar memorial event the previous year. Jennifer had praised not just the hotel's luxury and service, but its discreet professionalism and respectful treatment of military personnel attending somber occasions. The recommendation had been enough for Victoria to make her reservation 6 weeks in advance, paying the substantial deposit without hesitation or concern. What Victoria hadn't anticipated was that her travel-weary appearance and deliberately modest clothing would immediately mark her as unwelcome in the eyes of the hotel's management. Throughout her groundbreaking military career, she had encountered various forms of discrimination and prejudice, but civilian establishments still sometimes caught her off guard with their shallow assumptions. Richard noticed Victoria the moment she entered the lobby, his trained eye immediately cataloging what he perceived as problematic elements. His assessment was swift and, in his opinion, conclusive. Clothing that suggested budget shopping rather than designer labels, a canvas travel bag instead of luxury luggage, practical shoes instead of designer footwear, and an overall appearance that didn't match the polished aesthetic he demanded from Grand Metropolitan guests. The contrast was stark, and, To Richard's way of thinking, unacceptable. Other guests in the lobby wore clothing that cost thousands of dollars, hand-tailored suits, designer dresses, shoes that required months-long waiting lists to purchase. Their accessories were equally expensive, watches worth more than luxury cars, jewelry that required insurance policies, handbags that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Victoria's understated appearance stood out, like what Richard considered a discordant note in an otherwise perfectly orchestrated symphony of wealth and privilege. In his experience, people who could afford the Grand Metropolitan's premium accommodations simply didn't dress like they shopped at discount stores or department chains. "Excuse me." Richard approached Victoria with the professional smile he reserved for situations that required diplomatic but firm action. His tone carried just enough warmth to seem welcoming while maintaining an undertone that suggested this interaction might not proceed as the guest expected. Victoria looked up from checking her phone, where she had been reviewing the confirmation details for her reservation and the schedule for the following day's memorial ceremony. "Yes, I have a reservation under Hayes. I'd like to check in, please." Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a change so subtle that most people wouldn't notice it, but that spoke volumes about his immediate decision regarding Victoria's suitability as a guest. "Of course, Mrs. Hayes. If you could just wait one moment while I speak with the front desk regarding your accommodations." He walked quickly to the reception area, where Ashley Chen, the afternoon desk clerk, was processing check-in paperwork for a businessman whose Rolex alone probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Ashley was a hospitality management graduate from Northwestern University who had been with the Grand Metropolitan for 2 years, and she prided herself on providing excellent service to all guests while maintaining the hotel's reputation for discretion and professionalism. "Ashley," Richard said quietly, positioning himself so that his back was to Victoria and his voice wouldn't carry. "The woman by the concierge desk claims to have a reservation under Hayes. Before you process anything, I need you to verify her credit card authorization and ensure all charges are properly pre-authorized. Something seems irregular about this situation." Ashley looked confused, glancing past Richard toward Victoria, who was standing patiently while observing the hotel's impressive interior with the appreciative eye of someone who understood both luxury and the sacrifices that made such luxury possible. "Sir, if she has a confirmed reservation, shouldn't we simply follow standard check-in procedures?" "Just do as I've requested," Richard said firmly, his tone carrying the weight of hierarchical authority. "I'm responsible for maintaining this hotel's standards and reputation, and I need to ensure this guest can meet our service requirements and expectations." Ashley reluctantly turned to her computer terminal and accessed the reservation system, typing in Victoria's name with growing curiosity about why her manager was treating this situation as unusual. What she found in the system surprised her considerably. The reservation was not only completely legitimate, but had been booked and paid for in full 6 weeks in advance. Moreover, the accommodations Victoria had reserved were among the hotel's most expensive. A premium corner suite on the 28th floor, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan and downtown Chicago. The total cost for 3 nights exceeded $15,000, and the payment had been processed through a military credit union account with an excellent credit rating and substantial available credit. "Sir," Ashley said carefully, turning back to Richard with obvious confusion, "the reservation is completely in order. Full payment received weeks ago. Premium suite accommodation. Excellent credit history with no flags or concerns. Mrs. Hayes appears to be exactly the kind of valued guest we typically serve." Richard's jaw tightened noticeably as he processed this information. Despite the legitimate reservation and substantial payment, everything about Victoria's appearance contradicted his expectations for a guest who could afford their most expensive accommodations. In his carefully constructed understanding of wealth and status, people who could casually spend $15,000 on a three-night hotel stay simply didn't dress like they shopped at mall department stores. "I'll handle this personally," Richard decided, his tone carrying a note of determination that suggested he wasn't going to allow computer systems and payment records to override his own assessment of the situation. Victoria had been waiting patiently near the concierge desk, using the time to observe the hotel's opulent interior with the analytical eye of someone who had spent decades in government buildings and military facilities around the world. The marble work reminded her of the Pentagon's more formal areas, while the attention to detail spoke of craftsmanship that she could appreciate even if she had never personally indulged in such luxury for its own sake. She noticed other guests moving through the lobby with the casual confidence that came from having significant wealth. Their clothing, accessories, and bearing all spoke of lives lived with material abundance. Victoria felt no envy or intimidation. She had briefed presidents and cabinet members, negotiated with foreign military leaders, and commanded respect in rooms filled with some of the most powerful people in the world. Hotel luxury was impressive, but it wasn't intimidating to someone who had earned her position through merit rather than inheritance. "Mrs. Hayes," Richard said as he approached, his tone carefully professional, but noticeably cooler than his initial greeting. "I've reviewed your reservation, and I'm afraid there may be some complications that we need to address before proceeding with your check-in." Victoria raised an eyebrow, her expression shifting slightly from patient courtesy to alert attention. "What kind of complications?" "I made this reservation 6 weeks ago and received confirmation, along with receipt of full payment." "Well," Richard hedged, choosing his words carefully to avoid statements that might later be interpreted as discriminatory, "the suite you've booked is one of our most exclusive accommodations. It's typically reserved for our VIP clientele, Fortune 500 executives, entertainment industry figures, diplomatic personnel. I'm concerned there may have been some misunderstanding about the level of service, amenities, expectations that come with that level of accommodation." The implication was clear, though Richard was careful not to state it directly. He was suggesting that Victoria didn't belong in the category of people who normally occupied the hotel's premium suites, and he was offering her an opportunity to reconsider her choice before potentially embarrassing herself. Victoria understood immediately that she was being judged solely on her appearance and found wanting, according to Richard's predetermined criteria for acceptable guests. The situation was both familiar and frustrating. Throughout her military career, she had encountered similar assumptions about her capabilities based on gender, appearance, or background. "I see," Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying a note of steel that Richard was too focused on his own assumptions to recognize or interpret correctly. "And what exactly would you suggest as an alternative, Mr. Sterling?" Richard felt a moment of satisfaction that Victoria had noticed his name tag and was addressing him with appropriate formality. In his mind, this confirmed that she understood the hierarchical nature of their interaction and would likely accept his guidance gracefully. "We have several excellent business-class accommodations available at rates that might be more appropriate for your travel budget," Richard offered, his tone carrying what he considered helpful guidance. "I believe you'd find them more suitable for your specific needs and expectations." Several other guests had begun to notice the extended conversation taking place near the front desk. A businessman in a hand-tailored Italian suit paused his phone conversation with what appeared to be a European business partner to listen discreetly. A woman wearing a Chanel dress that cost more than many people's monthly mortgage payment looked over from her champagne with curiosity about why the hotel manager was having such an extended discussion with someone dressed so modestly. "Mr. Sterling," Victoria said, her voice remaining calm, but carrying an undertone that suggested this conversation was moving beyond simple misunderstanding. I booked and paid for a specific accommodation. Are you suggesting that your hotel is unable or unwilling to honor a confirmed reservation? Richard felt a flush of irritation at being challenged so directly in front of other guests who were clearly observing the interaction. In his mind, Victoria was proving his point about her unsuitability for the Grand Metropolitan. A truly affluent and sophisticated guest would have accepted his suggestion gracefully, rather than creating what might become a scene. Madam, Richard said, his professional veneer beginning to show signs of strain. I'm simply trying to ensure that all our guests have accommodations that match their expectations, needs, and comfort level. Perhaps this particular establishment is not the right fit for what you're looking for in your Chicago accommodations. The words hung in the air with unmistakable meaning, and the nearby guests who were listening understood exactly what Richard was implying. He was telling Victoria, as diplomatically as possible, that she didn't belong at the Grand Metropolitan and should find somewhere else to stay. Victoria felt the familiar weight of discrimination settling around her, like an unwelcome but recognizable garment. It was the same dismissive attitude she had faced during her early military career, when male colleagues assumed she couldn't handle command responsibilities. It was the same prejudice she had encountered in briefing rooms, where senior officials initially dismissed her input based on gender and appearance, rather than expertise and experience. But Victoria had learned long ago that dignity was not something others could grant or take away. It was something you maintained regardless of how others chose to treat you. She had earned her position through merit, sacrifice, and decades of exceptional service. No hotel manager's prejudice could diminish that reality. I understand your position, Mr. Sterling, Victoria said simply, her voice carrying quiet authority, despite the circumstances. Thank you for clarifying your hotel's policies regarding guest selection. Richard felt a moment of triumph as Victoria appeared to accept his implicit suggestion that she leave the Grand Metropolitan. He had successfully maintained the hotel's exclusive standards without creating an obvious confrontation, and the other guests who had been observing would see that the establishment maintained appropriate clientele through careful management. As Victoria reached for her canvas travel bag to prepare for departure, she felt a mixture of disappointment and weary resignation. The bag was heavier than she had remembered, weighted down by personal items she had brought for the memorial ceremony. Photographs of fallen soldiers, letters from their families, and official documents related to the next day's proceedings. As she lifted the bag from the marble floor, the worn zipper caught on the decorative brass corner of a nearby chair, causing the bag to twist unexpectedly and spill some of its carefully packed contents onto the polished stone surface. Among the items that scattered across the expensive marble were her reading glasses in their protective case, a small leather notebook containing her notes for the memorial speech, and a military identification card that slid across the smooth floor with surprising speed. Richard's ingrained hospitality training overrode his desire to see Victoria leave, and he instinctively bent down to help gather the fallen items. As a hotel manager, he had been trained to assist guests, even in situations where he preferred they would simply depart. His movement was automatic, a response developed through years of customer service experience. As Richard picked up the military ID card, his eyes automatically registered the information printed on the official document. The card bore Victoria's photograph alongside her full legal name, Victoria Elizabeth Hayes. But it was the rank designation that made Richard's blood freeze and his hands begin to tremble. General, retired, United States Army. The ID card also displayed a series of service ribbons and commendations that Richard couldn't interpret, but that clearly indicated decades of distinguished military service at the highest levels. Below Victoria's photograph was a security clearance designation that suggested access to classified information at levels that touched the highest echelons of government and military operations. Richard's mind reeled as he tried to reconcile the simply dressed woman standing before him with the reality of the identification card in his trembling hands. General Victoria Hayes was not just any military officer. She was among the most senior-ranking women in United States Army history, someone who had commanded thousands of troops, advised presidents on matters of national security, and served with distinction in some of the most challenging military operations of the past 3 decades. This is your identification?" Richard stammered, holding up the card with a trembling hand while his face drained of color. Victoria looked at the card, then back at Richard, with the patient expression of someone who had spent decades dealing with people who made incorrect assumptions about her capabilities, authority, and background based on superficial characteristics. "Yes," she said simply, her voice carrying quiet dignity. "Is there some problem with my military identification, Mr. Sterling?" The lobby seemed to have gone quiet around them, as other guests noticed Richard's shocked expression and began to understand that something significant was happening near the front desk. Ashley Chen had moved closer from her position behind the reception counter, curious about the sudden change in her manager's demeanor and the obvious distress written across his features. "General Hayes," Richard whispered, the military title feeling foreign and completely inadequate on his tongue. "I sincerely apologize. I didn't realize. I had no idea." "You had no idea about what exactly, Mr. Sterling?" Victoria asked, her voice still calm, but carrying an edge that suggested this conversation had moved far beyond simple misunderstanding into territory that would have consequences. Richard looked around the lobby, suddenly aware that his discriminatory behavior toward a retired general had been witnessed by multiple guests and staff members. Some were openly staring now, while others were discreetly filming with their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something that would likely become a social media sensation within hours. The businessman, who had been conducting his international phone call, had ended his conversation and was watching intently. The woman in the Chanel dress had set down her champagne and was observing with obvious fascination. Other guests had paused their conversations entirely, recognizing that they were witnessing a moment of profound significance that would likely have consequences extending far beyond this hotel lobby. "General Hayes," Richard said, his voice now carrying desperate respect mixed with growing panic about the implications of his behavior. "Please allow me to personally escort you to your suite immediately. There has been a terrible, inexcusable misunderstanding." Victoria studied Richard's face for a long moment, seeing not malice but the shallow thinking and prejudicial assumptions that had led to this situation. Throughout her career, she had fought not just foreign enemies, but also the biases and preconceptions that had tried to limit her advancement based on gender, appearance, and others' expectations about what military leaders should look like. "The misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling," Victoria said quietly, but clearly enough that her words carried throughout the now silent lobby, "is that you assumed my worth and suitability based on my clothing rather than treating me with the basic respect and courtesy due to any confirmed guest. My military service record is not what makes me deserving of dignity. My humanity does." The words carried clearly through the marble lobby, creating a moment of profound silence that seemed to stretch indefinitely. Other guests felt the weight of Victoria's statement, many suddenly becoming aware of their own tendencies to judge others based on appearance, wealth, or social status. A woman in an expensive Hermes scarf looked visibly embarrassed, suddenly remembering times when she had made similar assumptions about people based on their clothing or apparent economic status. A businessman in a $1,000 suit shifted uncomfortably, recognizing his own participation in the subtle discrimination that pervaded elite establishments. Ashley Chen stepped forward from behind the reception desk, her face flushed with embarrassment for her manager's behavior and her hotel's failure to live up to its stated values of excellence and respect for all guests. "General Hayes," Ashley said, her voice carrying genuine remorse and professional dignity, "please accept my personal apology. On behalf of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, your suite is ready for immediate occupancy, and I would be deeply honored to personally ensure that your stay meets our highest standards of service and respect." Victoria nodded graciously to Ashley, recognizing a young professional who understood the gravity of the situation and was attempting to salvage both her guest experience and her hotel's reputation. "Thank you, Miss Chen. I appreciate your professionalism and courtesy." Richard stood frozen, still holding Victoria's military ID, with hands that continued to tremble visibly. The magnitude of his error was becoming clear, not just in terms of personal embarrassment, but in potential consequences for his career and the hotel's reputation. Video footage of his discriminatory treatment of a decorated general would likely go viral within hours, creating a public relations disaster that could damage the Grand Metropolitan's reputation permanently. "General Hayes," Richard attempted again, his voice breaking slightly with the stress of the situation. "If you could please give me an opportunity to make this situation right." Victoria took her ID card from Richard's trembling fingers with calm dignity. "Mr. Sterling, I came to Chicago to prepare for a memorial ceremony honoring young soldiers who died under my command. These men and women sacrificed everything for the values this country claims to represent, including the fundamental principle that people should be judged by their character and actions rather than their appearance or economic status." She paused, looking directly into Richard's eyes, with the steady gaze of someone who had faced far more serious challenges than hotel discrimination. "Today you've demonstrated that we still have significant work to do in living up to those values in our everyday interactions." Dr. Marcus Washington, a prominent civil rights attorney who had been having a business lunch in the hotel's restaurant, approached the group with obvious concern. "Excuse me, General Hayes," he said respectfully. "I couldn't help but witness what just occurred here. I want you to know that this treatment was completely unacceptable and potentially illegal, and you have legal options available if you choose to pursue them." Victoria nodded appreciatively to Dr. Washington, recognizing someone who understood both the legal and moral implications of what had transpired. "Thank you, Dr. Washington. Right now, I'm primarily focused on honoring my fallen soldiers rather than pursuing legal remedies. But I appreciate your support and concern." Colonel retired James Mitchell, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, wearing a navy blazer, approached the growing group with obvious respect. "General Hayes," he said, offering a crisp salute. "Colonel Mitchell, retired Marine Corps, it would be my honor to escort you to dinner tonight if you would accept the invitation." The gathering crowd of supporters around Victoria made Richard's prejudicial treatment even more obvious and embarrassing. Hotel guests who had initially ignored or dismissed her based on her appearance were now clearly uncomfortable with their own complicity in the discriminatory atmosphere that had enabled Richard's behavior. Ashley Chen had prepared Victoria's key cards and arranged for immediate access to the presidential suite, an upgrade she had authorized without consulting Richard, understanding that the situation required decisive action to preserve any possibility of salvaging the hotel's reputation. "General Hayes," Ashley said respectfully, "if you're ready, I'll personally escort you to your accommodations and ensure that every aspect of your stay exceeds your expectations." As Victoria prepared to leave the lobby with her dignified entourage of supporters, she turned back to Richard one final time. Her expression carried no anger or vindictiveness, only the weary disappointment of someone who had hoped for better from her fellow citizens. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, "I hope this experience teaches you something valuable about the danger of judging people based on superficial characteristics. Some of the most remarkable individuals I've known have worn uniforms covered in mud and dust from serving in difficult conditions, not designer suits purchased for impression management." Richard watched helplessly as Victoria walked toward the elevators, surrounded by respectful guests who were eager to express their gratitude for her service and their embarrassment about her treatment. The contrast between their dignified behavior and his own discriminatory actions was devastating and would haunt him for the remainder of his career. Within an hour, multiple videos of the incident had been posted to various social media platforms. The footage showed Richard's discriminatory treatment of Victoria, followed by the dramatic moment when her military ID revealed her true identity as one of America's most decorated female generals. The story quickly went viral, with millions of viewers expressing outrage at Richard's behavior and admiration for Victoria's dignified response to prejudice and discrimination. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel's corporate headquarters received hundreds of angry calls and emails demanding Richard's immediate termination. Local news stations picked up the story by evening, and within 24 hours, it had become a national conversation about discrimination, assumptions, and the proper treatment of military veterans. Richard Sterling was terminated from his position the following morning, effective immediately. His discriminatory behavior toward a decorated general had not only embarrassed the hotel, but had also exposed the institution to potential legal liability and lasting reputational damage that would require years to overcome. Victoria completed her stay at the Grand Metropolitan, where every staff member went far beyond normal service standards to demonstrate respect and appreciation for her presence. She attended the military memorial ceremony that had brought her to Chicago, delivering a moving tribute to the soldiers who had died under her command, while drawing on her recent experience as an example of the ongoing struggle for dignity and respect that characterized American society. The story became more than just a viral video. It became a catalyst for conversations about respect, dignity, and the dangerous assumptions people make about others based on superficial characteristics, reminding everyone that true worth cannot be measured by the cost of someone's clothing.